The hum of the warship's engines filled the quiet corridor. Kellen walked slowly, careful not to disturb the other soldiers. The ship had been through a rough battle near the outer rim, and the air still smelled faintly of burnt circuits and scorched metal. He carried a small toolkit and a soft cloth in his hands. It was time to do his duty. At the far end of the corridor, Lyra's armor rested on a reinforced rack. It was unlike any armor Kellen had seen before, sleek, angular, and glowing faintly with a strange energy. The scratches and dents across its surface told the story of the recent fight. Each mark represented a narrow escape, a hard strike that the alien warrior had survived. Kellen knelt before the armor, examining every groove, every dent. He began to clean it carefully. The cloth moved over the metal in slow, deliberate strokes. He didn't speak. He didn't think about the dangerous battles he had fought that day. All that mattered now was the armor in front of him. Lyra had been watching from the corner of the room, silent and still. She had expected hostility from humans. After all, they had been enemies for generations. Yet here was Kellen, treating her armor with respect, not disdain. She tilted her head, curious. "You could ignore it," she said finally, her voice sharp but calm. "No one forces you to care for me or my armor." Kellen paused for a moment. His hands didn't stop moving, but his eyes met hers. "It's not about being forced," he said softly. "It's about doing what's right." Lyra narrowed her eyes. "Right? You are a human. What is right to you may be weakness to another." Kellen smiled faintly, though his hands remained busy. "Maybe. But even weakness can matter. Even small actions can change things." Lyra did not answer. She only watched, the corner of her mouth twitching slightly as if she were amused. Or perhaps confused. Kellen worked on the armor, polishing every joint and brushing away tiny particles of dust. He noticed the dents near the shoulder plate and carefully ran his fingers along the metal, imagining the blows that had struck here. "You remember everything?" Lyra said suddenly, her voice quieter now. "Every scratch, every mark. You think, like a historian, but with care." Kellen looked up at her again. "Every mark tells a story. Every story matters." Lyra blinked. She had never heard a human speak like that. In her world, warriors were tools of war. Their value was measured in victories and obedience. Emotions were unnecessary. Yet Kellen spoke of stories and care, not power or dominance. She wondered why. "You are strange," she said finally. "I have fought humans before. They care little for us, for anything beyond their own survival. And yet you care for me, or at least for what protects me." Kellen's hands paused for a fraction of a second before returning to the work. "Armor protects you, yes, but it also represents you. That's why it matters. That's why you matter." Lyra's eyes widened slightly. She had expected insults, perhaps mockery, maybe even fear, but never words like these, never recognition. The idea that someone could see value in her, not just as a warrior, but as a being, was foreign. "You treat me like I matter," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Why?" Kellen's hands stopped moving entirely. He looked up, at her fully this time, meeting her gaze with steady eyes. "Because everyone matters," he said simply. No hesitation, no sarcasm, just truth. Lyra studied him, trying to understand. Her instincts told her to doubt, to test, to strike if she sensed weakness. But her curiosity was stronger than her caution. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching him continue his work in silence. Minutes passed. Kellen worked without a word, cleaning and repairing small scratches, adjusting loose joints, making the armor shine. The soft glow of Lyra's energy lines reflected in the polished metal. The room felt quieter, calmer, as if the armor itself appreciated the care it received. "I do not understand your kind," Lyra said finally. "You fight and kill, yet you can show respect to your enemies. You can see value where others see none. How can this be?" Kellen paused and looked at her. "It is not about enemies or allies. It is about recognizing life. Life matters. Not because it is strong or powerful, but because it exists. Every being has a story. Every story has worth." Lyra considered this. She had never been taught to value stories. Her kind measured worth in battles won, missions completed, and obedience obeyed. Yet here was Kellen, a human, showing her that the world could be different, even in a galaxy torn by war. She shifted her weight, taking a step closer. "And you? You believe in your words because—" Kellen smiled faintly. "Because it is the truth I live by. Because it makes me who I am. Because even small acts of care can change the world. I have seen it happen." Lyra studied him in silence. She did not move. She did not speak. Yet the tension between them softened ever so slightly. The armor glistened under Kellen's careful hands. But more than that, the moment itself seemed to shine with an unspoken understanding. Hours passed, but neither of them noticed. The ship hummed around them, distant alarms muted by the soft focus of their interaction. Kellen finished polishing the last scratches, adjusted every joint to perfection, and finally set the cloth aside. He stood, straightening his shoulders. Lyra's eyes followed his every movement. She had never been treated like this, not by humans, not by her own kind. And yet, here was a human, showing respect, care, and recognition, all without demand or reward. "You are strange," she said again, softer this time, almost reflective. Kellen nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe humans are just human. We see value in what others ignore. We notice what others miss. And we act, even when it is hard." Lyra didn't respond immediately. She looked at her armor, then back at him, then slowly nodded. The silence between them was no longer tense. It was thoughtful, almost comfortable. Something had shifted. For the first time in a long while, Lyra wondered if the humans, so often underestimated, were more than just enemies. Perhaps in their way they were something remarkable. Kellen picked up his tools, preparing to leave. "Rest well," he said quietly. "Your armor is ready. And so are you." Lyra looked at him, her eyes lingering on the human who had treated her with quiet dignity. She did not answer, yet in her silence there was acknowledgement, a recognition that had not existed before. And as Kellen walked away, the hum of the ship continued, carrying with it the quiet but profound promise that even in a galaxy torn by war, humanity could shine, through care, through courage, and through the simple act of seeing the value in another. The battle had ended, but the ship still carried the tension of conflict. Kellen walked through the corridors slowly, the quiet hum of the engines following him. Every corner reminded him of the fights they had endured, the close calls, the lives, almost lost. But now, in this moment, he focused on a different duty, one of patience and quiet understanding. Lyra watched him from across the room, her arms crossed, the polished armor gleaming faintly in the overhead lights. She had never expected this. Humans were known for their unpredictability, their stubbornness, and their ability to survive against all odds. But Kellen's actions were different. He had treated her armor with care, a sign that he treated her with care as well. It unsettled her. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her voice careful, almost wary. "You could leave. Others would not notice." Kellen paused and glanced at her. "I am not here to be noticed," he said softly. "I am here because it is right, because it matters." Lyra tilted her head. She studied him, searching for weakness or deceit, but found none. "You speak of matters and rights," she said, "but what do those words mean to you? Humans are strange. You fight with such skill, and yet you show concern for enemies." Kellen smiled faintly, brushing a finger over a small dent in her shoulder plate. "Because every life matters," he said simply. "Because every being has a story. And because sometimes caring is stronger than fighting." Lyra's eyes narrowed. She had not heard words like these from a warrior before. In her culture, strength was measured in victory, power, and obedience. Compassion was a weakness. Yet here was a human, calmly asserting that value could exist beyond the battlefield. "You treat me as though I matter," she said finally, her voice softer this time. "Why?" Kellen looked up fully, meeting her gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, no mockery, only honesty. "Because you do," he said simply. "Every being matters. That is all I know." Lyra took a step back, processing his words. She had expected insults, threats, or indifference. Instead, she found respect. Curiosity stirred within her, mingled with caution. She had lived her life trusting no one. Now she wondered, could she trust this human? "You are not afraid of me?" she asked, tilting her head. Kellen shook his head. "Why should I be? You have every right to be wary, but fear is not the same as respect, and respect is important. That is why I care." Lyra considered this. Her instincts told her to strike, to test him, to push him away, but something in his calm, steady manner disarmed her. There was no threat, no trickery, only a human acting with quiet integrity. "You speak as though humans are different," she said. "Perhaps stronger than we give you credit for, yet I have fought many humans. Most care only for themselves or their own survival. You are not like them." Kellen returned to his work, checking each joint and brushing away tiny particles of dust. "Maybe not," he said, "but even one act of care can change a story. Even one choice can make a difference." Lyra watched him in silence. There was a strange calm in the way he moved, a confidence born not of arrogance, but of certainty in his own values. She had never seen anything like it. Her kind measured worth in victories, in orders obeyed. But Kellen measured worth in small, careful acts of attention and respect. "Do you always act this way?" she asked cautiously. "Do you see value in everyone?" Kellen looked up and met her gaze. "I try," he said. "Some are easier than others. Some are harder, but it is always worth trying. Everyone has a story worth noticing." Lyra's eyes softened slightly. She had never thought about stories in this way. To her, life was about power and survival. Humans, in contrast, saw the meaning behind actions, the worth in each being. It was alien to her, yet she felt a strange pull toward it. "You are strange," she said, shaking her head slightly. "I do not understand you. Yet, there is something in your actions I cannot ignore." Kellen nodded. "That is all I ask. Notice what matters. Care for what you can. And perhaps in the end, that is enough." The silence stretched between them, but it no longer felt tense. It was thoughtful, reflective. Lyra shifted her weight, her gaze falling on the gleaming armor, then back to Kellen. She wanted to speak, to question, but she hesitated. Trust was not easily given, especially to an enemy. "You fight well," she said finally, her tone almost neutral. "And yet you show care where others show none. Do humans always fight this way?" Kellen smiled faintly. "No. We fight because we must, just like others, but we also act because we choose to. There is a difference. Strength is measured by action, not just force." Lyra considered this. In her world, Strength without compassion was power. Strength with compassion was uncertain, untested. Yet she felt a strange respect for Kellen, for the way he combined skill with care, action with conscience. "You believe in your words," she said softly. "Even now in this quiet moment you act with purpose. And yet, you do not fear me. Why not?" Kellen paused, looking at her steadily. "Fear is for those who let it control them. I act because I choose to. I care because it is right. That is all. Nothing more, nothing less." Lyra's gaze lingered on him. She had never encountered anyone like Kellen, someone who faced danger without fear and acted with quiet integrity. She felt a stirring of something unfamiliar, curiosity, maybe even respect. "You are strange, human," she said, her voice softer now, almost reflective. "And yet, perhaps there is wisdom in your ways." Kellen nodded. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it is only truth. Sometimes truth is enough to change a story." The room fell silent again. The polished armor gleamed under the lights, reflecting the quiet determination of the human who had cared for it. Lyra watched him, her mind turning over his words, his actions, his calm presence. For the first time in a long while, she wondered if humans were more than what her people had taught her to fear. Kellen finished his work, placing the tools neatly aside. He stood, straightening his shoulders, his eyes still on Lyra. "Rest well," he said quietly. "Your armor is ready, and so are you." Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. She did not respond immediately. Yet in her silence, there was acknowledgement, a recognition that had not existed before. Something had shifted. For the first time, she considered that humans could be more than rivals or enemies. Perhaps they could be allies, teachers, or even something greater. And Kellen, through simple acts of care and quiet honesty, had begun to open a door that few humans or aliens could ever open. The hum of the ship continued, steady and calm, carrying with it the quiet promise that even in a galaxy torn by war, humanity could shine, not through conquest, but through courage, care, and the simple act of recognizing the worth of another. The warship drifted silently above the surface of a rocky planet. Outside, the stars shone cold and distant, but inside, the corridors hummed with quiet energy. Kellen walked steadily toward the training chamber, his boots making soft echoes on the metal floor. Lyra followed at a distance, her armor gleaming under the ship's lights. She had spent the night thinking about the human who had treated her armor with care. The words he spoke, the way he acted, so different from anyone she had known, lingered in her mind. She was not sure if she trusted him, but she felt an unfamiliar pull to understand him. Kellen entered the chamber first, setting his toolkit on a bench. "I thought it would be useful for you to see something," he said calmly. Sometimes knowledge is as important as armor or weapons. Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Knowledge? From a human?" She stepped closer, curiosity mixing with caution. "What could you possibly teach me?" Kellen smiled faintly. "Not what you think. I want to show you how humans survive, not just with strength, but with mind and heart." He picked up a small holographic device from the bench and activated it. A three-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, stars glowing like tiny suns against the dark void. Kellen's finger traced a path across the map. "Look here," he said. "Humans have faced enemies stronger, faster, and more numerous than ourselves. We survived because we adapt. We cooperate. We think ahead. Strength alone does not save us. It is what we do with it that counts." Lyra studied the map, her eyes following the human's gestures. "You survived by cleverness, by tricks, by planning," she asked, skeptical but intrigued. "Not tricks," Kellen corrected gently. "By choice. We choose to work together, to protect each other, to care for those who need it. That is our greatest strength. Lyra folded her arms. Care? Protection? These are words my kind do not use. We fight to win or to survive. Why would you value these things over victory? Kellen paused, looking at her seriously. Because victory means nothing if you lose yourself in the process. A soldier is more than their skill or weapon. They are a person, and people matter. Lyra frowned, trying to comprehend. Her culture had never emphasized such ideas. Strength, obedience, and loyalty were the only measures of worth. Yet Kellen's calm confidence made her pause. Perhaps there was a deeper kind of strength she had not considered. You speak as though humans are better than we know, she said softly. Perhaps there is value in your ways. Yet I do not understand them fully. Kellen nodded. You do not have to understand everything at once. Just notice, watch, learn, and maybe you will see why we act this way. For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to step closer. She studied him, noting the calm in his movements, the certainty in his voice. It was a strange feeling, to respect an enemy, to want to understand them. She did not like it, and yet she could not deny it. You are patient, she said quietly. Most humans would not spend time explaining themselves. They would fight or ignore me or, worse. Why are you patient? Because patience allows understanding, Kellen replied simply. Understanding allows trust. Trust allows change, and change is worth striving for. Lyra considered this. Her mind raced with questions, but she hesitated. Trust had always been dangerous for her kind, yet something about Kellen made it feel safe, almost natural. You speak of trust, she said slowly. Yet you trust me? Kellen looked at her directly. I do not trust blindly, but I see that you are capable of more than your culture expects. I see that your actions can be guided, your choices respected. That is enough to start. Lyra blinked. She had never been spoken to this way, not by humans, not by her own people. The honesty in his words, the calm in his demeanor, made her rethink what she believed about alliances and enemies. You believe humans are different, she said thoughtfully. But are all humans like you? Or am I mistaken? Not all, Kellen admitted. Some fight for power. Some care only for themselves. But enough of us act with purpose, with conscience, with heart, that we survive. That is what matters. That is what I show you. Lyra studied him in silence. She wanted to challenge him, to push him, but she could not. The quiet certainty of his words, the care in his actions, created a strange bond, a fragile trust that neither of them fully understood yet. Perhaps, she said finally, I can learn from you, not because I trust easily, but because I wish to understand your kind. Kellen nodded. That is enough. Understanding comes first. Trust comes later. The hours passed. Kellen showed her small lessons in human tactics, how humans adapt to unexpected events, how they solve problems together, and how they value each individual's skill. Lyra listened intently, sometimes skeptical, sometimes fascinated. For the first time, she considered that strength could be measured not just by force, but by wisdom, cooperation, and conscience. You do not fear failure, she remarked finally. Humans seem to act even when the outcome is uncertain. Why? Because fear cannot guide action, Kellen said. It can only paralyze. We act because it is necessary. We act because it is right. And sometimes, action itself teaches us lessons we could not learn otherwise. Lyra pondered this. In her experience, failure was shameful, dangerous, or fatal. Yet humans, at least this one human, treated failure as a chance to learn, to grow, to improve. The concept was unfamiliar, yet oddly compelling. You are Strange, she said softly. And yet, perhaps there is wisdom in your ways. Perhaps even strength. Kellen smiled faintly. Strength is not always obvious. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is small. But it can endure longer than brute force. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. She did not yet trust him fully, but the seed of respect had been planted. She had begun to see a human not as an enemy, but as something more, something capable of inspiring change, even in a hardened warrior like herself. The chamber grew quieter as the ship continued its orbit. Outside, the stars sparkled like tiny fires in the endless darkness. Inside, Kellen and Lyra shared a silence filled with thought, curiosity, and the beginnings of understanding. "You will show me more?" Lyra asked at last, her tone careful. Kellen nodded. "As much as I can. But you must watch closely, and you must think for yourself. That is how humans learn, and that is how you will see our strength." Lyra considered this. She had spent her life relying on power, skill, and strategy. Now she was being asked to see something different, to learn patience, to notice value, to understand intent. It was a new kind of challenge, and she felt intrigued. "Very well," she said finally. "I will watch. I will learn. But understand this, human. I am not yet your ally." Kellen smiled faintly, unfazed. "I do not ask for alliance. I only ask that you notice. That is enough for now." And so, the quiet bond continued. Lyra followed him as he moved through the ship, observing, questioning, and slowly beginning to understand. Kellen guided her with patience, showing her the small but significant ways humans endured, survived, and thrived. For the first time, Lyra saw humans not as mere opponents, but as beings capable of remarkable courage, wisdom, and compassion. And though she did not yet fully trust him, she could not deny the truth of what she saw. Humans had something unique, something that could change the way the galaxy saw them. The stars outside shone cold and distant, but inside, a small light of understanding had begun to burn. It was fragile, quiet, and tentative, but it was real. And for the first time, Lyra allowed herself to wonder, could a human truly teach her something her own people never could? The alarm blared across the warship, shaking Kellen from his quiet routine. Red lights pulsed in the corridors, reflecting off the polished metal of Lyra's armor. Outside, enemy ships had appeared on the sensors, rogue raiders attacking both, human and alien fleets. The crew rushed to stations, their movements precise and urgent. Kellen grabbed his weapon, checking the magazine with practiced hands. Lyra stood nearby, her energy armor glowing faintly, ready for combat. She had followed him willingly now, a mix of curiosity and respect guiding her actions. Neither spoke much. Words were unnecessary here. Preparation mattered more. "Stay close," Kellen said, his voice steady. "We move as one. Watch each other." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. She had always fought alone, relying on her strength and instincts. Humans, she had learned, valued cooperation, and now she saw why. Following his instructions, she mirrored his movements, their coordination growing naturally despite their differences. The enemy ship struck first, launching a barrage of missiles toward the fleet. The human and alien crews responded immediately, activating shields and returning fire. Kellen and Lyra moved to the observation deck, which offered a clear view of the chaos outside. "Predict their paths," Kellen said. "They are fast, but not perfect. Anticipate, adapt, react." Lyra studied the attackers, noting their formations and maneuvers. Humans often relied on calculation and strategy, rather than raw power. Following Kellen's lead, she adjusted her position, firing at enemy vessels with precision. Together they covered each other, compensating for blind spots and weak points. "Good," Kellen said quietly. Your timing is improving. Trust your instincts, but trust me too. Lyra felt a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos. Humans fought differently, yes, but their focus, their ability to adapt under pressure, impressed her. For the first time, she considered that survival was not only about strength, it was about thought, flexibility, and teamwork. An enemy vessel broke through the defenses, heading straight for a critical supply module. Kellen assessed the situation instantly. We need to intercept it now! Lyra moved beside him, matching his speed. Their weapons synchronized perfectly, firing at the approaching ship. Kellen dodged incoming fire, rolling to cover, while Lyra's energy shields absorbed blows that would have shattered ordinary armor. Together, they created a moving wall of defense, buying time for the fleet to respond. You anticipate well, Kellen said, firing a calculated shot that disabled the Raiders' engines. Your reactions are fast, but don't overextend. Cover each other. Lyra felt a rush of exhilaration. The thrill of combat was familiar, but the experience of working with another being, sharing trust and strategy, was new. She realized that human values, cooperation, patience, calculation, could amplify her own strength in ways she had never imagined. A second wave of attackers emerged, faster and more aggressive. Kellen glanced at the holographic display, then back at Lyra. We divide their attention, he said. You lure the left flank, I take the right. Watch for openings. Lyra nodded, following the plan. She fired, drawing enemy fire toward her while Kellen targeted weak points with precision. Each move was deliberate, each action calculated. The combination of her power and his strategy created an unexpected advantage. The rogue raiders began to falter, their formation breaking under coordinated assault. You are improving, Kellen said, rolling to avoid a missile. See? Strategy and action together, that is what humans do best. Lyra felt a spark of respect, no, admiration, for this human who taught by example rather than words. She had underestimated humans, thinking them limited to brute force or luck. Now, she saw their true strength, their mind, their ability to adapt, and their courage in the face of danger. One enemy ship slipped past the defenses, heading directly for the ship's control center. Kellen noticed immediately. That one is mine, he said, firing a precise shot to disable its thrusters. Lyra followed, creating a shield wall to protect him as he moved closer to finish the attack. You trust easily, she said, almost laughing amid the chaos. I would never have trusted anyone like that. Kellen glanced at her briefly. Trust is earned in moments like this. Watch, learn, act. That is how humans survive and succeed. Lyra's respect deepened. She realized that trust and cooperation were not weaknesses. They were tools, tools that could save lives, create opportunities, and build strength beyond what she had ever imagined possible. The final wave of enemy ships approached, but the humans and aliens, now fighting together, were ready. Kellen and Lyra moved in perfect sync, their combined actions turning the tide of battle. Every maneuver, every calculated shot, every protective shield worked in harmony. The last raider exploded in a brilliant flash of light. The ship shuddered, but the crew cheered. Kellen and Lyra stood side by side, catching their breath. Lyra's armor bore scratches and marks, but she had survived. And more than that, she had learned a new way to fight, a new way to think. You are different, she said finally, her tone thoughtful. Not just in battle, but in everything. Humans, you are more than I believed. Kellen nodded, brushing a speck of dust from her armor. We can be remarkable when we choose to be, but it is not just about us. It is about how we act, how we work together, how we care for what matters. Lyra considered this, looking at the human beside her. She had spent her life relying on her own skill, her own power. Yet here was someone who taught her that strength could be multiplied through trust, strategy, and understanding. "You saved me," she said softly, "not because you had to, but because you wanted to. That is something my kind rarely sees." Kellen smiled faintly. "It is what humans do. We survive, we protect, we act. Sometimes that means saving someone we do not have to. Sometimes it means teaching others to see value where they did not before." Lyra's expression softened. She had begun to see humans not as rivals, but as beings capable of remarkable courage, wisdom, and compassion. And though she had not yet fully trusted Kellen, she knew that this experience, this battle, had changed her perspective. The ship slowly returned to calm. Outside, the stars glimmered silently, as if indifferent to the struggles below. But inside, a small light of understanding and respect had been ignited between human and alien warrior. "You are patient, and you are brave," Lyra said finally, her voice low but sincere. "Perhaps I was wrong to judge humans so harshly. Perhaps there is more to your kind than strength alone." Kellen nodded, watching the stars through the viewport. "There always is. Strength is not only force, it is mind, heart, and courage combined. That is how humans endure." Lyra considered this, her mind turning over the lessons she had learned. Trust, cooperation, adaptability, these were concepts she had never embraced fully. Yet now, under the guidance of this human, she had seen their value firsthand. And for the first time, she wondered if humans could teach not just survival, but a new way to see the galaxy, a way that balanced strength with wisdom, action with care, and courage with conscience. The battle had ended, but its lesson lingered. Kellen and Lyra stood side by side, watching the stars. And for a brief moment, the enmity of centuries felt like a distant memory. In its place grew the possibility of something greater. A bond forged in battle, respect earned in silence, and understanding nurtured through courage. And so, in the quiet aftermath, Lyra began to see humans as more than adversaries. She began to see them as a force of hope, resilience, and inspiration, a kind of strength that even her own kind had rarely understood. The warship had returned to a calm orbit above the rocky planet. The red alarms had faded, replaced by the steady hum of engines and the soft chatter of crew members as they assessed the damage. Kellen walked slowly through the corridors, his eyes alert, but his mind focused on Lyra. She followed him at a measured distance, her posture relaxed but still cautious. The battle had tested them both, and the results were clear. Lyra had survived, yes, but she had also learned something. She could not ignore humans were more than simple soldiers. They had strategy, patience, courage, and a sense of morality that even the strongest warriors of her kind seldom understood. "You move through these halls with confidence," Lyra said, her tone almost casual, though her eyes studied him carefully. "Even after battle, you do not seem shaken. Why?" Kellen glanced at her, a faint smile on his lips. "Because confidence comes from preparation and understanding. We survive not because we are fearless, but because we know what to do and we act. Fear is natural, but it does not guide us." Lyra considered this. Her kind often let fear and anger dictate action. Humans, by contrast, seemed to act with a calm determination that could turn chaos into order. She realized that this was not weakness. It was strength. Perhaps a different kind of strength, one she had never valued before. "You fight with precision," she said thoughtfully. "And yet you also think of the lives around you, of the consequences. Humans. You are strange. Most of my kind would not care for such things." Kellen nodded. "We care because it matters. Every life matters. Every choice matters. That is how we endure and how we thrive. Lyra's eyes softened slightly. She had spent her life valuing only power and victory. Now she found herself questioning those values. Could strength truly exist without compassion? Could victory have meaning without conscience? The human before her suggested it could. "You speak as if humans are more than warriors," Lyra said, her voice low. "Perhaps there is wisdom in your ways that my people fail to see." "There is," Kellen replied calmly. "Strength alone is not enough. Strategy alone is not enough. Understanding, patience, courage, and care, these are what make humans capable of surviving against odds that seem impossible." Lyra followed him into the observation deck. The stars outside were still cold and distant, but within the ship, a new warmth had begun to grow. She watched him move, noting how his calm presence seemed to steady not just himself, but those around him. Humans relied on more than weapons. They relied on thought, action, and connection. "You inspire loyalty," she said after a long pause. "Not through fear, not through power, but through example." Kellen nodded. "It is not inspiration I seek. I act because it is right and because it matters. Others notice, and sometimes they follow. That is all." Lyra studied him in silence. Her mind turned over his words, the lessons from the battle, and the quiet truth of his actions. She realized that humans could teach more than survival. They could teach understanding, cooperation, and respect. These were qualities that could break barriers, even between species that had fought for centuries. "You speak of choice," she said finally. "And yet my kind, we are bound by orders, by hierarchy, by expectation. How can choice exist in such a system?" Kellen looked at her, thoughtful. "Choice exists even when rules are strict. It exists in small actions, in how you treat others, in how you decide to act when no one is watching. Even small choices can change outcomes. Even small acts of care can inspire change." Lyra considered this. Her culture measured success by obedience and efficiency. Humans measured success by courage, understanding, and the impact of their actions. It was a different logic, but it made sense. Perhaps there was room for both ways of thinking. "You have changed my view of humans," she said softly. "Not all humans, perhaps, but you are different. You are patient, wise, and strong in ways I did not expect." Kellen smiled faintly. "I am just one human, but if even one person can show what is possible, perhaps it can inspire others. That is how change begins." Lyra nodded slowly. She had learned to rely on her own strength, but now she realized there was more to strength than she had known. Humans had taught her that courage was not just about facing danger, it was about acting rightly, even when the path was uncertain. "The galaxy is harsh," she said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "And yet, humans endure. You survive, where others fail, not just because of skill, but because of heart." Kellen looked at her, his eyes calm. "Heart, yes. Courage, yes. But also thought, patience, and care. Together these things create strength that lasts. That is why humans matter. That is why each life matters." Lyra's expression softened. She had begun to see humans not as rivals, not as simple enemies, but as beings capable of remarkable influence. Their values, their choices, their courage. They were lessons that even the strongest warriors of her kind could benefit from understanding. "You teach without demanding," she said finally. "You show without insisting. That is a strange kind of power." "Perhaps," Kellen replied. "But it is effective. Actions speak louder than words, and understanding grows when it is observed, not forced." Lyra looked at him, the weight of her thoughts evident in her posture. She had underestimated humans, believing them to be simple and limited. Now, she saw their potential, not just in battle, but in diplomacy, in survival, and in shaping the galaxy. Humans could influence, inspire, and endure in ways her kind rarely imagined. "You are remarkable," she said quietly. "Perhaps I was wrong to doubt your kind. Perhaps humans can teach even the strongest warriors something new." Kellen shook his head slightly, modestly. "I am just one human. But humans, in general, endure. We learn, we adapt, and we care. That is why we survive, and why we can inspire change." Lyra nodded. The lesson was clear. Strength alone was not enough. Wisdom, patience, courage, and care were equally important. Humans had mastered these qualities in ways her people had not. And for the first time, she considered that humans could be more than allies or enemies. They could be teachers, guides, and examples. The galaxy was harsh and dangerous, but humanity had a light within it that could shine even in the darkest places. "You have changed my perspective," Lyra said finally, her voice soft but sincere. "Not completely. I will still judge by action, not words. But I see now that humans can matter in ways I did not understand." Kellen smiled faintly. "That is enough. Understanding begins small. Trust grows slowly. But change can happen, one step at a time." Lyra looked out the viewport at the stars. For centuries, her kind had relied on strength and hierarchy. Now, she realized there was another way, a way guided by conscience, courage, and care. Humans had shown her that through quiet example and deliberate action, and as the ship continued its orbit above the rocky planet, Lyra allowed herself to consider a future she had never imagined, one in which humans and aliens could work together, learn from each other, and grow stronger through cooperation rather than conflict. For the first time, she saw possibility where there had only been history of war. And she knew that humans, through their courage, patience, and heart, could inspire not just her, but entire worlds to change. The quiet bond between Kellen and Lyra had grown deeper. Respect had replaced suspicion. Understanding had replaced doubt. And in that understanding, a new path began to emerge. A path that could reshape their worlds, and perhaps the galaxy itself. The warship moved silently through the vast darkness of space. Outside, distant stars sparkled like tiny beacons in the void. Inside, Kellen walked steadily down the main corridor, Lyra following him. Their steps echoed softly, but the atmosphere was calm now, a quiet that felt earned after the recent battles. Lyra had spent hours reflecting on what she had learned from the human beside her. His words, his actions, his patience, all of it had shifted something deep inside her. Humans were not merely soldiers, not merely survivors. They were thinkers, planners, and above all, beings capable of true courage and care. "You walk as if the universe is smaller than it is," Lyra said, her tone thoughtful. "Do humans always act with such confidence?" Kellen glanced at her, his expression calm. "Confidence comes from understanding, not arrogance. We face danger often. We cannot allow fear to rule our actions. We prepare, we plan, we act. That is how we endure." Lyra nodded slowly. She had witnessed his endurance firsthand. Humans did not merely react, they adapted, strategized, and cared. Even when facing overwhelming odds, Kellen had acted with a clarity and purpose that few in her culture could match. "You have changed how I see humans," Lyra admitted quietly. "I expected chaos, unpredictability, selfishness. Yet I see patience, thought, and courage. You show care where others show only ambition. That is unusual." Kellen smiled faintly. "It may be unusual, but it works. Humans survive because we combine courage, action, and conscience. That is how we endure and how we inspire. Lyra's eyes followed him as he moved to the observation deck. Outside, the galaxy stretched endlessly, indifferent to the struggles below. But inside, she felt a warmth she had not expected, a sense of hope, of possibility, and of understanding. "You speak of inspiration," she said softly. "Can humans truly change the galaxy? Or is that just your belief?" Kellen leaned on the railing, gazing at the distant stars. "Belief alone is not enough. Action must follow. Humans survive, adapt, and care. Through these actions, even one human can influence many, and many humans together can shape entire worlds. It is not just belief, it is reality." Lyra considered this. Her kind had ruled with strength and hierarchy, valuing obedience and power above all. Humans measured worth differently, by courage, by choices, by the impact of actions. She realized that this perspective was not weakness, it was strength, the kind that endured even against impossible odds. "You trust easily," she said finally, her tone cautious. "I do not. But you do not fear my judgment or my power. Why?" "Trust is built through observation and understanding," Kellen replied. "I see your skill, your decisions, and your strength. I see your potential. That is enough to start. Fear is natural, but it cannot guide action. Understanding can." Lyra studied him in silence. She had spent centuries relying on instinct, training, and hierarchy. Humans relied on thought, reflection, and courage. And yet their methods were not weaker. They were stronger in ways she had only begun to understand. "You are remarkable," she said softly. "Not because of your strength, but because of what you choose to do with it." "Humans, perhaps we underestimated you." Kellen nodded. "We often are underestimated. But action, courage, and care, these cannot be ignored. They endure longer than fear or force alone." Lyra took a deep breath, her mind replaying the battles, the lessons, and the quiet moments of observation. She had learned that strength alone was incomplete. Wisdom, patience, and compassion were equally powerful. Humans embodied these qualities, showing her that survival and honor were not contradictory. They complemented each other. "You have taught me more than I expected," Lyra said, her voice quieter now. "Not just about humans, but about what it means to fight, to endure, and to lead. Your kind, you are more than I realized." Kellen looked at her, his calm gaze steady. "We all have the capacity to inspire, to act rightly, and to endure. Humans are not perfect, but we strive. That striving is what allows change, survival, and hope to exist." Lyra's expression softened. She realized that she had begun to see the galaxy differently. Humans were not just warriors. They were examples of courage, thought, and conscience. They acted with purpose, even when outcomes were uncertain, and they inspired others through their choices. "Perhaps," Lyra said thoughtfully, "humans are not defined by their victories or their battles, but by how they face challenges, by how they choose to act when it matters most." "Exactly," Kellen said with a faint smile. "Strength alone cannot shape the future. Choices, courage, and care, that is what endures. That is why humans matter." Lyra looked out the viewport, at the stars. For centuries, her kind had relied on hierarchy and force. Now she began to understand a different path, one guided by conscience, courage, and cooperation. Humans had shown her that strength and care could coexist, and that both were necessary. "For lasting impact, you have changed my perspective," she admitted. "Not completely, perhaps, but enough to consider new possibilities. Humans, you are more than I believed. Your courage and patience, your heart, These are lessons worth learning. Kellen nodded. That is all I ask. Learn, observe, and act. Even small actions can create change. Even one choice can shape the future. Lyra's gaze returned to him. She had learned to respect him, to understand his perspective, and to recognize the value of human courage. The bond between them, forged through battle and quiet observation, had grown stronger. Mutual respect had replaced suspicion, and understanding had replaced doubt. "You fight with honor," she said quietly. "You inspire without demanding. That is a power my kind rarely values, but I see it now. Perhaps humans are more capable than any of us believed." Kellen smiled faintly. "We do not seek praise. We act because it is right, because it matters, and because we must. That is all." Lyra nodded, her mind clear. She had witnessed the essence of human strength: courage, patience, wisdom, and care combined. It was a lesson she would not forget. She had begun to see humans not as rivals, not as mere soldiers, but as beings capable of inspiring change, fostering hope, and enduring in ways her kind had rarely imagined. "The galaxy is vast and dangerous," Lyra said finally, her tone steady. "But perhaps humans can show others a different way, a way that combines strength with wisdom, courage with care, and action with conscience." Kellen nodded. "That is what we strive for. That is why humans endure, and that is why every life, every choice, every act of courage matters." Lyra looked at him, fully understanding for the first time. Humans were not just strong. They were remarkable because of how they used that strength. They survived, they inspired, and they shaped the galaxy not just through power, but through heart and conscience. And in that moment, she realized the truth she could not deny. Humans mattered. And through their courage, patience, and care, they could change not just her world, but the galaxy itself. The ship drifted silently through space, carrying them forward. The stars stretched endlessly around them, vast and indifferent. Yet within the ship, a small light of hope and understanding burned brightly. Kellen and Lyra stood side by side, a human and an alien, bound not by orders or fear, but by respect, learning and the quiet knowledge that courage, wisdom, and heart could endure beyond any battle. And so, in the calm aftermath, the galaxy seemed a little smaller, a little brighter, and a little more full of possibility for those willing to act with courage, care, and conscience.